one of the questions that I wanted to pose to Ben, I don't know if you actually remember this or noticed the same zeitgeist, but back in like the 2010s, thereabout, there was this sort of David Mamet-esque kind of tell your truth, man thing that became in vogue, that was like in vogue in terms of media. And I think that Louis C.K. was sort of the masculine representation of that. And then someone like Lena Dunham was sort of the feminine representation of that. These people who sort of created these sort of autobiographical, comedy drama pieces that were incredibly famous, where they showed us their demons. And in the early 2010s, it was sort of seen as like something that we should reward as a society. How brave these people are for showing us their demons, like Lena Dunham, naked in the bathtub, eating a cupcake after hitting rock bottom, or Louis C.K. sort of showing us his pathology around women. This was stuff that people saw as being brave in terms of exposing their inner demons, their vulnerabilities, because it helps us in turn sort of exercise our own. And there was a hot second there sort of before the 2016 election kicked off and before Me Too came about, where the society and the culture was sort of celebrating this kind of narrative form, but like there was also a huge backlash to it afterwards. The very thing that we sort of propped up as like the height of writing on television and comedy was then admonished as like toxic people, and I thought it was quite telling in the sense that we have this weird cognitive dissonance where we celebrate people for showing us their demons, and we then admonish them for having them in the first place. Right. Louis C.K. showed us he had a lot of pathology around women in the show Louis, which is why I wasn't really surprised when it came out that he was kind of a creep. Lena Dunham also showed us that she was sort of this white, rich, upper class, out of touch liberal. Mm-hmm. So when that shit came out of her mouth on Twitter,
I used to watch Girls. That's entirely what the show was about.
Yeah, it was about that. So when that stuff came out about, and that's why I found those shows so interesting.
And when it came out that Louis C.K. was in fact the luckiest dog in New York, I became very disgusted.
Secret Life of Pets.
I'm Max.
But yeah,
Secret Life of Pets is a great movie.
It is a great movie. I loved it.
It's a banger.
It's such a banger. I was convinced that my cat does the exact same thing when I'm not home. But yeah, like the question that I wanted to pose to you was, did you notice this phenomenon? And also, what do you think about this sort of cultural process surrounding these two figures, both Lena Dunham and Louis C.K., in terms of how the culture dealt with them when they, even though they had already showed us who they were?
Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, I think that, I think that this might not be a very interesting answer, but, I thought that Louis, like his show was brilliant.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Vasquez.
I liked, I'm as prone to being irritated by Lena Dunham as the next, as you would probably expect me to be. But I thought her show was in many ways very good. I watched it.
Same here.
And I think that a culture that errs on the side of finding stuff like where people are grappling with what might be wrong with them interesting, is certainly way more interesting than one that insists that nothing.
Directly after that was when the Mary Sue thing that the right-wing people criticized sort of came about, where because the conversation about representation was going on, people started to see every single character as a representation of a specific demographic. And if that character was flawed or grappling with their demons in any way, that was seen as negative representation. Whereas I found that era so fascinating. Do you think, but then again, I also don't think that era could ever come about again, specifically because showing someone's demons in such a visceral way would draw the attention of this sort of sect of people, and most networks don't want to take the risk of attracting that sort of public eye. So in a sense, I do think that art in that regard has sort of lost out because of people's lack of charitability when it comes to seeing other people's flaws, whether that be IRL or through fictional characters even.
Yeah, and that's definitely a loss. I mean, I remember, and like I think one of the things I've found most depressing as a lot of this has happened are like the people who, for example, responded to the fall of Louis C.K. by saying like, "Oh, I should have known," like listening to this, right? That he was, this person. So like in retrospect, what was I ever doing? Enjoying his work, or like I don't know, maybe this is too obscure an example, but Junot Diaz, who, if people don't read him, is is a brilliant writer, short stories writer and novelist, and then there were some, one who was like really, famous and high profile for a long time. And when people, there was some Me Too allegations about him, which I have to say fell a lot closer to the Aziz Ansari side of the line than the Harvey Weinstein side. It sort of consisted of like, a couple of reports of like people who'd been out to dinner with him, and other people had like, they thought he was kind of a dick in the dinner conversation, and there was a gender dimension to it. And, he kissed somebody at a party once who didn't want him to kiss, anyway, it's very, it's not damning stuff, but, one of the things I started to see a lot, when people responded to that were, oh, and he pretends that when he depicts this bad stuff in his fiction, that's not him, that there's some sort of separation there. And I was like, God, this is so infantilizing, right? Like this idea that we're just like, we're moralizing this stuff to such an extent that we can't basically do what like a good 10th grade English teacher would tell you to do and separate, say, no, that's fictional. It might be partially inspired by the author's life, but that's different, right? You have to be able to make a separation, or just the sophistication to say, okay, maybe he really does have some of those demons, but like just because there might even be some overlap between what he's depicting and what he really doesn't mean that these are aspects of his life that he's proud of or that he's celebrating, right? Like that's a huge leap, and just underlying the whole thing is this obsession with policing the behavior of strangers, right? Like that people that we're never going to know any of these people, right? Like in the Woody Allen case.
Speak for yourself, Ben. I am going to meet Woody Allen whether you like it or not.
Okay, other than Peter, we're never going to know any of these.
I'm meeting Woody Allen, guys. It's happening.
Yeah. And like, I don't know how many of the things that people said about Woody Allen are true. I remember being kind of fascinated at this at one point because a couple of his children were like writing like dueling articles, like saying, like giving different accounts of what had happened like decades ago.
Yeah.
And
you have Dylan Farrow, who's the victim, and I believe Ronan Farrow, her brother, has came out in support of her, but I think there were a couple other of children involved that were arguing. It's a mess.
But this is also people's personal family business, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like the thing that
there was a point when like I remember reading a lot of these articles and being kind of fascinated by the issue, and then it kind of struck me as like, what are you doing, right? Like these, like you don't know any of these people, right? Like you're never going to be in a position to know or do anything about what might or might not have happened with this like sad like family drama from like decades ago. Why is this even interesting to you, right? Like this obsession with and yeah, it's definitely a neoliberal thing because like it's all because everybody, if somebody's famous, right, then like you're judging every aspect of them as a consumer, but
yeah, exactly. They are a commodity, therefore their life is a commodity.
Yeah.